Hello, everybody, and welcome to a brand new episode of the One Stump Short Podcast, episode 7 this week. And I'm delighted to say I've got another guest with me. Please welcome to the show, Mr. Jarrod Kimber. Hi, Jarrod, how are you?
Yeah, not too bad. Thanks for having
Good.
me.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. Obviously, we've just witnessed a pretty special test, I think, at Lords over the last few days. Great result for Pakistan in the end. Pretty even contest, though. I think England might be a little disappointed to let that one slip. What were your feelings on the events at Lords?
Yeah, it was. I suppose it was interesting with Pakistan coming back after 6 years, and you had you had the whole situation of Mohammad Amir, but also Misbah and this new team, and you also just had the basic cricket ideas of these are probably the two teams most likely to be fighting out for number one in the world, maybe perhaps other than Australia. So there was a lot of great factors there, and then we had pretty ordinary pitch probably, but a really good test match played on it. And I think for the series and for everything, probably the right result happened, even if England do come back to win. I think it was a very important win for Pakistan, and obviously very important for players like Mohammad Amir. So no, it was great to be there.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned Misbah, the 114 in the first innings. There's been quite a lot said about him, his style, his captaincy, but he really seems to have brought this Pakistan team together. When I was a kid, there were some very talented guys, Waqar, Wasim, Inzamam, and although there's those sort of comedy moments, he was also a really bloody good batsman at times. But there was always that element of controversy, not just the Amir stuff, but there was other series which were just laced with bad feeling and sour taste left in various mouths. But Misbah seems to have brought this group together, and they seem like a calmer, more focused team, really.
Yeah, I suppose if you look at the actual team, some of it has to do with the personalities involved. For instance, they looked completely different in the World T20 and in the World Cup when they probably had other players around who were not as good influences. When you put Yunus Khan and Misbah Al Haq in senior positions within a team, and also Mickey Arthur probably of recent times as the coach, there's a lot of wise, sensible heads there. And it's not a young team. It's a team that has sort of risen under Yunus and Misbah in many ways. But a lot of their players are around 30 years old, from 25 through to about 30 odd. And so I think they've grown up with now Misbah, whereas some of the sort of Shahid Afridi, Shoaib Malik stuff of the recent past, or Salman Butt, I mean, if you think those have been three of their captains, and they're all quite interesting human beings in different ways. And then suddenly to get Misbah and Yunus to just take over the team, you could see why they'd be a different kind of team. And they're not, as I said, just if you look at the personalities, you take Wahab Riaz out of this and maybe Mohammad Amir. Everyone else is kind of a role-playing type player. Everyone else is not a raving. I mean, Yunus Khan's a bit of an egomaniac, but in a completely different way. He's not an egomaniac in the way that, say, Shahid Afridi was or Shoaib Malik was. But, but even even for Pakistan, he's quite a sensible egomaniac. And so I think what you have is just a different kind of team altogether. I mean, I was looking at the team a couple of times and I was thinking Wahab Riaz is probably the only kind of old Pakistan kind of player that's in that side. Mohammad Amir might have been different had he not been banned, because that could have got to his head. But he's been knocked down a few pegs. So it's really only Wahab who has this sort of streak of wildness in him. And everyone, I mean, look at their batsmen. They're pretty dour batsmen all the way through to Sarfaraz Ahmed. And even he's kind of more a busy batsman than a reckless one.
Yeah, I mean, I said Shafiq had a great little cameo in the second innings. What did he get, about 48, 49, just short of a half century. But, the important runs. And it was a question mark, I think, over the Pakistan team when they arrived. People had kind of expected their openers to give out early, and they kind of did. Though Masood plays a couple of nice shots. But then it was that middle order of Azhar Ali, Yunus Khan, Misbah, and then after that it was not much else, and it would fall back to the bowlers. But I think they proved to be a little bit better than a lot of people gave them credit for.
Yeah, I suppose Asad Shafiq's a bit of an unknown quantity, despite the fact that he's been around for 5 or 6 years now. Because he's batted at 6 and behind Yunus and Misbah, and because he's done quite well in the UAE, I think people still think overseas there's a bit of questions to be answered for him. I mean, he's a quality batsman. He made 60 odd in the first innings as well, and was probably the best batsman in the match, really. I know Misbah made the 100, but when it came down to it, I think Asad, certainly technique-wise and temperament-wise, is probably the best player all around that from either side, really. You've obviously got the two older guys, but even someone like Sarfaraz, who's, yet again, he's about 29. Sarfaraz is kind of like the wicket-keeping version of Yasir Shah, in that you think, well, why was this guy not playing earlier? He's clearly a test player. First time I ever saw him play, I just thought this guy should be playing international cricket. It seemed ridiculous that he hadn't been earlier. Yeah, I think that because of guys like Sarfaraz and Asad Shafiq, and even Azhar Ali, who hasn't massively proved himself overseas, I think people thought maybe that middle order wasn't quite as good as it had been hyped up as in the UAE. But once you see it in the UK, you realise that it can make runs over here. And they're going to have to make runs because their top two probably aren't going to make many runs. And their number 3 was a bit unlucky in this test. But Azhar Ali, he I don't think he can carry the openers on his own. And so 4, 5, 6, 7 are going to have to make a lot of runs. I mean, their batting order doesn't really make sense at the moment. It would probably make a lot more sense if they dropped one of the openers, brought in one of the stronger middle order players that they have outside the team, and move Asad Shafiq to 3. But being that Asad Shafiq's made so many runs at 6, they're probably not going to do that.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. And the big point, I think, and you've touched on this a couple of times, is that a lot of people looked at this Pakistan side, and even though they were one of the top-ranked teams in the world, it was always, well, can they do it on the road? Can they do it away from home? And, they did a job. They scored over 500 runs. Yasir Shah got more out of a Lord's wicket than a lot of people do in an entire career. And it was something that I was frustrated by in a sense, because there was a lot of people go like, they only do it on home soil or in the UAE or whatever you want to call it. And yet this is a really damn good team, and it's a great opportunity for them to showcase that, not just in England, but I think to the cricketing world.
But they've got 2 massive series. No matter what happens in England, they're going to have to go to Australia, which is probably even harder at the moment. England's probably got maybe more weaknesses in their current team than Australia too, right at the moment. So you've got a situation where this is a big couple of summers back to back for Pakistan. So yeah, I mean, almost no team other than South Africa over the last few years has really earned respect away from home. I know England have probably been one of the closest ones to that, but realistically, Pakistan should have to they should have to earn that respect, because they're so good at home that at times you have to wonder why they haven't been better away from home. Having said that, there are very few bowling attacks in the world that could. I mean, they're basically, I would say they're probably missing out on 3 of the best 10 bowlers in the world at times over the last 5 or 6 years. In that Syed Ajmal's action obviously degraded to such a level that he was throwing. Yeah. You have Muhammad Asif, who, I think he'd probably be about 35 now. He'd still be bowling at about 80 miles an hour, swinging it both ways, seaming it whenever he wanted to. And Muhammad Amir, who, who knows what he would have done over the last 6 years. So the fact that they've even done anything is incredible. And then to bring back one of those guys, it has only managed to strengthen them, especially away from home, because that's where Amir is going to be probably even more handy to them. It's not so much at home. Yasir Shah might get all the wickets when they play at home, and they've got other good spinners as well. But realistically, it's going to be when they travel. That's what Amir should be able to bring to them, and also why Misbah has been asked not to leave yet. Because I think the PCB looked at the tour to England and the tour to Australia, and they went to him specifically and just said, give us these 2 more tours. At the end of that, if you still don't want to keep going, that's fine. But if you give us these 2 more tours, we might be able to do something special. And that's kind of the way that world cricket works at the moment. You only need to do something special over a short amount of time, and everyone marvels at it. If you look at how short the England era was of being, on top of the world, it wasn't that long. And even Australia, they basically won 2 series back to back, and everyone was talking about them. Whereas Pakistan have the ability in this current team to beat England and maybe even beat Australia. That'd be phenomenal. That'd be as good as anything that South Africa did in their reign, I would think.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, Mohamed Amir, they're a big part of that future, both this series and the Tour of Australia, because those seam bowlers are going to be so vital in English conditions, Australian conditions. I know, as we said, Yasir Shah did brilliantly at Lords, but moving to Old Trafford, where again the ball is likely to probably move around a bit, those seam bowlers are going to be so vital to their success.
Well, if you look at modern English wickets, essentially it's not the same as the old days where you could bring Terry Alderman. If you brought Terry Alderman to England now, I'm not sure he'd be of much use. He would swing it around a little bit, but I think he'd be a little bit too slow in modern cricket. And also, I just think that there's that huge period in the middle of the game where I'm not sure Terry Alderman would do much.
Yeah.
And if you wanted to bring a perfect attack to England right now, you'd probably want two guys who are good with a new ball, one, both of which you could swing it and at least one of which who can seam it. You would want a reverse swing bowler who was legitimately quick. And you'd probably want a leg spinner, if not, an off spinner, if that's all you had, who could control the game but could also attack. It's pretty much exactly what Pakistan have. The only thing they're missing really there is the all-rounder. And they have the all-rounder, Mohammad Hafiz, but his bowling action's been, banned for so many times of chucking. If they had Mohammad Hafiz pretty much coming to England with the perfect bowling attack, the sort of bowling attack that can get the most out of the new ball, that can get the most out of the ball when the lacquer comes off it, that can control the game in the middle of the day, that can come back with reverse swing. It's a phenomenal attack when you think about it. And, you look at someone like Rahad Ali, I'm not sure he even bowled well at Lords. I've seen him bowl better than that. And, I've got a lot of friends who follow Pakistan cricket very closely. They all think he's a phenomenal talent as well, and he looks like the weak link. So he was the weak link who took 3 wickets. So, it's quite, the whole thing is, they're quite well set up to play in England. The only thing they're missing really to be successful in England is probably opening batsmen. And considering that they're playing a team that has probably more weaknesses with the bat right at the moment, it's a huge advantage that Pakistan seem to have.
Yeah. And let's use that as a segue to talk about the second test. Starts on Friday at Old Trafford. I think the batting lineup is pretty unlikely to change for England. And as you said, there's some question marks there. I think it's fair to say. Obviously, Gary Ballance came back in. He got that 43 in the second innings, but there's still people not convinced that he should be in there at all. James Vince, I think, is under a bit of pressure because he had a big opportunity to lead really from the front there in the second innings. He got himself out really for 42. And just generally, Hales is still kind of under a little bit of pressure, but equally kind of safe because there aren't many other options at opener. And Joe Root gave his wicket away twice. It was a very strange test, really, from an England's batsman's point of view.
Well, let's go through it. Alex Hales averages 30 after 8 tests. He had a good series against Sri Lanka where he didn't actually capitalise and make the hundreds that would have made him safer, would have made his average look better, would have made everyone feel better about him. That's not to say he's going to go, but there's a very big chance by the end of this might be his last series for England, at least in this incarnation. I mean, he's been brought in to the side to be this attacking opener, and his strike rate is 45. It's a very odd situation at the moment. I mean, he's obviously a very talented player, but whether he's good enough to be a test opening batsman, we don't know. Gary Ballance, it's hard to tell if he's in form or not in form, because generally he bats the same way, but sometimes he makes runs and sometimes he doesn't. I'm not sure that he would have made anyone feel massively more happy than they did beforehand about him. James Vince, you don't want to be harsh on someone, but I just don't think he ever should have been picked for Test cricket. So far, I've been pretty much validated with that. I think you drop him now, you let him go back and work on the things that he needs to work on, which is just a simple little thing. He needs to make runs. He needs to learn how to make runs in all situations. His innings in his second innings knock it was bizarre. He should have gone out a bunch of times. He played a bunch of stupid shots. And at no stage did I think I was watching anyone who should be in Test cricket. I mean, he looked like a guy who averaged 29 in Division 1 cricket last year. And I can't see how they're going to continue to go with him. You've got Johnny Bairstow, who's they're eventually going to have to drop as a wicketkeeper. As far as I can tell, they already want to drop him as a wicketkeeper. Then it's not sure Butler is ready. And so, you've got a situation there where they're kind of holding Bairstow there, but Bairstow kind of knows he's not going to be there as a keeper, which is going to change their batting lineup again. And not to mention Moeen Ali as well, who made 152 tests ago, but doesn't quite look like a Test batsman, doesn't quite look like a Test bowler. It's a very weird setup that they have at the moment. And it's funny. I was just looking back. I was comparing it to the Lord's Test against India where they lost. And if you compared the two lineups, it just felt like that lineup. I mean, you had Cook out of form, but there was always a chance he was going to come back into it. You had Balance in quite good form, Root in really good form. Stokes was actually struggling at that point, but everyone sort of knew after what he did in Australia that he was, going to be a fair player.
Yeah.
and Pryor was still on the side. It's quite interesting. It just feels like a completely different feel to then. As to now, it looks like back then it looked like a bunch of people were maybe out of form, but something could happen, and Pryor was obviously going to be replaced. Whereas now, it kind of looks like something completely different. It almost looks like there is a lack of talent, which is a huge worry for English cricket going forward. I mean, the fact that they didn't bring Borthwick in ahead of Balance sort of tells me that they don't trust Borthwick. And if they don't trust Borthwick, I'm not sure who there is. And they don't trust Hildreth because he hasn't come in either.
Yeah, that's weird.
You got to get to a certain point where it's just like, well, if they're not rating the guys who are out of the team, and the guys who are in the team don't look good enough, that's a real concern.
Yeah. I mean, Borthwick and Balance, that whole debate was slightly odd. I kind of said in the podcast last week when I talked to Peter Miller, I could kind of see where they were coming from with Balance. He played Test cricket before. He recently scored 100 for Yorkshire, so he was at least in short-term sense, in some kind of form. And rather than throwing Borthwick in at the deep end against Pakistan, you've got somebody coming in who's kind of been there, done that, for lack of a better term. But as you say, if Vince can't get it going, I think he's the most under pressure of anybody in the England team right now, including Hales and Gary Balance. Because, as you said, with Balance, it's something he can just suddenly turn it on and score 50, 60, 70, 100 runs just out of nowhere. Whereas Vince, I don't know, he just hasn't looked right. And at some point they have to think about that.
Well, I mean, Scott, basically, I think Vince is maybe just further proof that cricket hasn't really worked out analysis and is still relying on people who look technically correct and who look like they have time when they're playing their shots.
Yeah.
And,
I mean, Hildreth, you mentioned James Hildreth. That's a really strange one for me because he's scored runs in the catch up for years and every year for Somerset. Even if he has a rough patch at the start of the year, he comes good at the end, and he just keeps scoring, and he never seems to get a look in. Yeah,
and I mean that's at that point you just think that they think he's not a Test player, which is fine, but that's a concern because there are a bunch of other guys out there. It's probably no different than someone like Klinger in Australia who was a similar situation. It didn't seem to matter how bad the Australian batting got or how often he was the best batsman in field cricket. He was never going to get that game, and Hildreth's in that position. And even Borthwick, as I said, it worries me that they would go to Balance over Borthwick, considering the two form of the two different players.
Yeah.
And also, Borthwick brings something else when it comes to bowling as well, which seems to be what this team likes. Everyone is trying to pick all 11 all-rounders at this stage. And so it would make more sense. But yeah, there's certainly a lot of problems. It's not a good batting lineup to come up against a really good attack. And the other thing is, and yet again, I've been saying this sort of stuff for years, and cricket teams in tests still don't quite get it, that basically having a bunch of all-rounders in a side is okay, and it works at a certain level of cricket, and generally that level is first-class cricket, or it might be Test cricket against struggling nations or improving nations. When you're an all-rounder, and let's say you can average 30 in Test cricket. When you can average 30 in Test cricket or 25 in Test cricket with the bat, and you're facing Wahab Riaz and he's bowling 90-mile-an-hour reverse swing, you're a tail ender. And when you're facing Yasir Shah and you're chasing, 250, 300 to win, and the pitch is spinning, and your top order's gone, you're a tail ender. And it's one of those things that I still don't think selectors and coaches have quite got their heads around. And I always look back to when Jas Kallis got dropped, retired, and Australia went over to play South Africa just after that. And to replace Kallis, they picked Robin Peterson and Ryan McLaren, about 7 and 8, if I remember correctly. And those two guys at 7 and 8 would have, on paper, you would have said, well, that's deepened the batting lineup a little bit.
Yeah.
When Mitchell Johnson is bowling, those two guys are tail enders. When Ryan Harris is bowling, those two guys are tail enders. And, and that's the difference. And we've seen England do it, to other teams as well. Even someone like, Stuart Binney and Ravi Jadeja, they're going to get the odd half century, and so's Wokes, and so's someone like Plunkett. But realistically, when it's a top level test bowler, that doesn't work. So that means that you still have to have your best top six, and and that's an easy thing to say. England may think they have the best top six at the moment. It's just not working.
Yeah, it seems pretty much certain Jimmy Anderson will come in for Stephen Finn. I mean, Stokes surely plays as well. Is that Jake Ball going to lose out, or does Moeen lose out? I mean, Adil Rashid's in the 14 for the test. How are England going to juggle their bowlers? Because I don't think there's any way Anderson doesn't play. There's no way
I think
Broad is dropped, and I don't think there's any way Wokes is dropped. So that's 3 straight away.
I think Anderson certainly comes in. I mean, it really does depend on if they think they've had enough of Moeen or not. I mean, it was only 2 tests ago he made 150.
Yeah.
So it is a big decision to drop him. That said, he's playing as a bowler, and I know he got Misbah and Yunus Khan, but he was basically unbowlable at times. And you can't do that.
Wicket away a bit in that second innings as well.
Yeah. Which is he's batting. I'm trying to think. He's batting at 7, so he should be a little bit smarter with the bat. But he has been given a license to attack. They can't complain too much if he throws his wicket away. But if he's throwing his wicket away and he can't perform a job, if he can't keep pressure on the batsman, even when the ball's not spinning, or if he can't be a legitimate strike weapon with the ball, I'm just not sure. So, I mean, they've picked a squad of 14 for a reason, haven't they? They probably don't know what they're doing. Let's be fair. When you're in the middle of a test summer, where their 4th, 5th test coming up, and they're still picking a squad of 14, that tells you they don't know what to do. I mean, there's every possibility that Vince gets dropped for Stokes, for instance.
Yeah.
And there's also every possibility that Stokes comes in for Ball, and Anderson for Finn, and Rashid for Moeen. I would think though that the way that Bayless likes to coach, and I would say the way that England have been trying to select their team over the last couple of years, is that they're going to try and make as few changes as possible. And if that's the case, then Anderson in for Finn makes the most sense, and perhaps Stokes in for Ball or Vince, depending on which way they want to go with their team. I think they probably give Moeen one more game, but if they're afraid of bowling him against Misbah, which I don't think him going out first ball against Moeen is really going to change much.
I agree.
That's still gonna cause a big problem for them. So I mean, I think the 14-man squad shows that they're not massively keen with their current lineup, but they may not make as many changes they may not make 3 changes.
It's strange because I mean the Stokes for Vince idea is interesting just because of what it does to the batting lineup, because that probably moves balance to 4, Bairstow to 5. Moeen at 6 or Stokes? They kind of like Stokes at 6, don't they? So Stokes at 6.
I would assume that's what they would do. Although it could be Stokes at 5, Bairstow at 6, Moeen at 7. But I'm not sure that they need the extra bowler. But they may just think that Stokes is a better batsman than Vince. I'm not massively keen on Jake Ball, but I don't think they might want to see him at least in one more test. He certainly didn't get great conditions for seam bowling. And I thought he did okay. I'm not convinced he's going to be a long-term test bowler, but he certainly has some skills and times he even got. I mean, I interviewed Mick Newell not that long ago. He was telling me he struggles to get over 85 miles an hour. He went over 85 miles an hour a few times, so that's not as much of a concern as it used to be. But there's certainly, I don't see how replacing Vince with Stokes is going to help them massively, but at the same time, Stokes is probably a better batsman than Vince.
And just going back to the Jake Ball point, I mean, as you said, he had a few balls over 85 miles an hour, and seeing him at Trent Bridge, he's come on leaps and bounds really in the last sort of 12 or 18 months. But one thing that was flagged as a concern, especially in the second innings, is his average speed dropped off quite considerably compared to the first. And, I don't think he bowled badly, but I know that's something that people were worried about, whether he could perform at the same level consistently across 4 or 5 days with batting, fielding and bowling and all that sort of stuff. So that's an interesting area for him because, especially with Stokes coming back, because and you hate to do it after one test, but he's vulnerable through no fault of his own almost.
Yeah, I mean, at the same time, he probably would have liked to have got more wickets. The ball was swinging for him at times. I kind of felt watching him was a little bit like watching Wokes when Wokes first came back. No, when Wokes first came back, actually. When you can almost see a guy who had a lot of skills as a bowler, but was bowling a little bit too fast. And so he was losing that other thing that he had, which was control and the skills. And so there was a few balls where, there was just a couple of balls where I thought a guy who's bowling at 87 miles an hour shouldn't be bowling balls this poorly.
Yeah.
And it wasn't like there was a lot of them, but you basically, in Test cricket, you kind of need to be in one camp or another. You either need to be phenomenally skillful, and then your pace is less important, or you need to be quite quick and your skills and your consistency are less important. You kind of need to be in one camp or the other. And that's kind of the way I look at Ball at the moment, is I'm not sure I see him in either of those two camps. Yeah. And there aren't many bowlers who are permanently kind of stretching themselves and being successful in that way. And that's kind of how I look at him. But he's come on in such leaps and bounds that, I'm looking at this incarnation, and I know that England are looking towards him in the future as well. They know that, like all teams, they know they're going to need to have between 6 and 8 bowlers to win cricket games. And just having 4 quick bowlers these days doesn't really help because everyone gets injured.
I kind of, to shoot off at a slight tangent, just thinking more on what you're just about Ball and not really fitting into sort of either being an out-and-out quick bowler or a guy who, he swings the ball well or he has a certain skill set. Is this possibly going back to... I don't want to call it an obsession because that's probably the wrong word, but it's something we've seen before with other bowlers. Wokes may have been an example of this from his first kind of opportunities with England to then his coming back into the side. That people said he didn't bowl quick enough, and it's the same with James Harris, who's obviously now at Middlesex, where the England setup didn't think Harris bowled quick enough, so they tried to take him away to Loughborough, get him to bowl a bit quicker, and he kind of lost that ability to move the ball and lost that skill element, which made him so successful at Glamorgan as a teenager and then at Middlesex when he first moved there. Is that kind of pointing to maybe prioritising the wrong things sometimes?
No, and I'll tell you why. Because, and this is something that you need to watch a lot of cricket to get, and it's not an easy thing to spot. But there is a difference between someone like James Harris who swings the ball, and there's a difference between what Jimmy Anderson or Mohammad Asif does. And they can bowl at 80 miles an hour on certain days and swing the ball and move a batsman around the crease and get him caught behind. Whereas someone like James Harris, even the early edition of Chris Wokes, I'm trying to think of someone else. There's a few of them out there who, when they bowl at those paces, they're not completely in control of the ball. The ball is kind of coming out of their hand and swinging, rather than them swing it the exact amount that they want to swing it. So there's a couple of great clips of on YouTube where you can watch a full over of Mohammad Asif, where he basically moves. I think there's one of Kevin Peterson, might be another one of Ricky Ponting, where he just moves them around the crease like what spinners do, and then eventually gets them in the position he needs to get them in to get them out. And there's a brilliant one from the Champions Trophy, the last Champions Trophy, when James Anderson was opening the bowling to, I think it was Robin Peterson. They had him opening the batting for South Africa. And you can see him bowling. He bowls 5 straight outswingers, and each one, I think, is maybe slightly wider than the last one. And he just keeps moving Robin Peterson in front of off stump, and then he bowls an in-swinger, and it gets him out LBW. Now, someone like James Harris or Chris Wokes or Jake Ball, they don't have those sorts of skills. There are very few bowlers in the modern game who have the ability to do that. I'm thinking Asif, Stuart Clark, Vernon Philander, Dale Steyn, Jimmy Anderson, Zahir Khan. Most bowlers, even when they swing the ball, it basically just swings out of their hand or it swings late, but they're not completely in control of it. Those sorts of guys, if you're bowling in low 80s, you're not going to be successful in Test match cricket. And there's 2 reasons for that. One is everyone who plays Test match cricket can kind of play a standard outswinger. And the other one is that once the ball, especially outside of the UK, but even in the UK, once the ball is 25, 30 overs old, having a natural outswinger is useless to you. I mean, you saw Ben Hilfenhaus's career is a really good example of this. When Ben Hilfenhaus bowled at 90 miles an hour and bowled outswingers, he was one of the best bowlers in the world. Unfortunately, by the time he got to Test cricket, he'd already started to slow down a little bit. But Ben Hilfenhaus has an amazing natural outswinger, but he was kind of useless to Australia from overs 30 to 70. He would sometimes get good reverse swing, but not always. You need a fast bowler who can bowl between 30 and 70. Now, that means he either needs to be completely on top of his game, like someone like Philander or Stuart Clark or Asif or, those sorts of guys, or he needs to be a little bit quicker. And, that's why we have more quick bowlers in Test cricket. The other thing is that Test cricket wickets are better than first-class wickets.
Yeah.
But better for batting, I mean. You see a lot of guys who are... who, especially like tail enders, guys like, I'm trying to think of someone off the top of my head, but I think it was Stuart Broad might even talk about it in his book. He found it easier to bat in Test cricket than he did in first-class cricket because the wickets were truer and the ball came through quicker.
Yeah.
And so you could punch the ball and you could bat a little bit different. Chris Jordan's probably another one as well, off the top of my head, where you can kind of see how they would, Paul Reifel's another one. You can see how they would be successful in Test cricket where they might struggle in first-class cricket. So that's basically why James Harris has to put on pace. And that doesn't mean that you're not right in that doesn't ruin some bowlers, and it does. But do you want to be a really good first-class bowler who's probably never going to play Test cricket, or do you want to take the chance? We saw, if you want perfect examples of this, Jake Paul is probably one. He's put on probably between 5 and 10 miles an hour.
Definitely, yeah.
Had he not put on that pace, he's not playing Test cricket. Tim Southey's career was almost over. And he's put on 5 or 10 miles per hour, probably 10 miles with Southey. And Chris Wokes is another one. All these guys probably wouldn't have stayed in Test cricket or wouldn't have come back to Test cricket or wouldn't have appeared in Test cricket without that extra pace. Now, the skill that you need to then have is you need to be able to do what Southey and Wokes have done. And what they have done is they have the ability to go up and down in pace when they need to. So if Wokes really needs to bowl quicker, we know he can. But we also know he can bowl very skillfully at a slightly slower pace. The more he plays Test cricket, the more skills he will develop because you kind of have to. And he's not a dumb cricketer. If you're in Test cricket for over 10 tests as a bowler, you learn so much. I'm saying, not that the batsmen don't as well, but the bowlers learn so much because they're suddenly in situations where, in first-class cricket, you don't bowl a lot of 4th, 5th, and 6th spells. And in first-class cricket, usually, and this is not the case with Wokes, but in first-class cricket, you usually have more all-rounders. And so you have to bowl more spells. So those are the sort of things that Test bowlers learn. And those are the sorts of things that where they should, that's when you learn, you have a lot of Test bowlers who learn off-cutters and slow balls later in their career. And these are the things they try and do just to stay ahead of the game a little bit.
Yeah.
But it's not as easy to say that... I'm trying to think. Do you remember Mark Davies, who played for Durham and Kent?
Yeah, it rings a bell. Yeah, definitely. I remember him for Durham. I think more than Kent, but I remember the name.
Yeah, he went to Kent at the end. I think if you have a look at his first-class record, it's phenomenal. But there's a reason why he didn't go up to the next level. There's a guy from Australia called Matthew Innes, who yet again had this phenomenal record. But people could see that A, they were mostly new ball bowlers, and B, that they probably just didn't have what they needed to have in order to get wickets on flat pitches. So I remember when Peter Siddle came through, he wasn't the most skillful bowler in Australia. The reason he came through is he was a phenomenal bowler on flat pitches.
Yeah.
And he could
get... Mark Davies' first-class bowling average was 22.42 in 109 matches.
And yet never even really got close to playing Test cricket. Now, part of that was he got injured a lot, but realistically, they knew that he was a phenomenal first-class player. Now, whether him or Matthew Innes, who both had pretty good records, probably should have got, maybe a test call-up to make sure that the selectors were right. But it's a bit like we were talking about with Hildreth and Klinger. There's a certain difference between a guy who's really good at first-class level and someone who can prosper at Test cricket. And that's why people take punts on people like Vince and Joe Burns because they're like, these guys they look like they could be better at the next level than Hildreth and Klinger and Mark Davies and these sorts of guys. So there's an obsession with pace, but it's not just about pace. if someone came along in English cricket now and had the skills of Muhammad Asif, I still think that they'd be a very big chance of being picked. No one's more obsessed with pace than South Africa, and yet Vernon Philander came through.
Yeah.
So, and even Stuart Clark. Stuart Clark was a proper quick when he was young. By the time he got picked to play for Australia, he was almost, medium fast bowler.
And he's bloody good at doing it.
Yeah, exactly. But to be skillful on those levels, you need to be, Chaminda vast. You need to know what you're doing on an almost like scary level. And even someone like Alan Richardson, he probably didn't work that out till he was 34 or 35, and it was too late.
It's crazy. Just to move on, Jarrod, one last subject I want to gather your thoughts on as a man of the cricketing world. It's the two-division test structure, or the proposed two-division test structure. I quite like the idea. I've got to admit, it took me a little bit of time to warm to it, but I've got to say I'm on board with it. I think it gives Test cricket more meaning. It gives the smaller nations something to kind of aspire to, in a sense, and the bigger nations a reason to compete that little bit harder to not get relegated. And I think it just kind of it's what Test cricket needs. I think it's the shot in the arm it needs to become more relevant again.
Yeah, and I think the other side to look at it is we already have two-division Test cricket. We just don't call it that. Yeah. Zimbabwe and Bangladesh are already in the second division, and Sri Lanka and the West Indies cancelled a series to play each other because there was no reason for them to play each other.
Yeah.
I think at one stage West Indies and New Zealand were playing off for 8th spot, and they played a one-test series. We have a second division. We just in no way have looked at it. And so look at the things that second division cricket can do. Most importantly, if the rights are sold as one and everyone gets a chunk of those rights, it means that everyone has a stake in Test cricket going forward. It means that smaller nations will actually get more money. It means that Test cricket will actually be... part of the reason that Test cricket isn't sold for as much as it should be at the moment is because it's sold bilaterally rather than in one big chunk. If you basically go to Star or Sky or Channel 9 or whoever wants to buy the rights to all the Test cricket and go, here you go, here is all the Test cricket in the world, the rights suddenly get bumped up because they're part of this huge package. Yeah. And Sky or Fox, maybe it's better not to talk about Sky, but maybe some of the smaller companies like Supersport in South Africa or 10 Sports or whatever, if they can buy the rights to these sorts of things, suddenly they've got so much Test cricket to show that it becomes a bigger deal for them rather than just getting individual series where they show it and then don't care about it again.
Yeah.
So there are little things like that. The money thing is massive because if we continue to have international cricket as bilateral agreements, eventually these smaller countries will just drop off the map. Then you've got the pure... Yeah, go.
I was going to say the money point's interesting because, and his name escapes me and I feel really terrible, the chairman of the PCB was on Test Special at the tea break during the Lord's Test, and he said there's things they want to do, they just don't have the money. So they can't, put the money into the women's game, the junior game, and do these projects because the money's just not there. And that all kind of comes back to that for not just Pakistan, but other nations as well. West Indies, I know their administration is an absolute shit show, but a financial shot in the arm might help them kickstart the game in the West Indies again. Which has been in decline
and
for
also we've
a long
seen
time.
We've seen all these... Oh, sorry.
I was going to say Test cricket has been in decline in the West Indies is probably the better way to put it. I think one-day cricket is still pretty popular there.
Well, I think one-day cricket's actually struggling there. I think CPL is the most popular thing there by a mile.
Yeah, actually, that might be a fair point.
But I mean, if you look at a system, if you, basically what we are creating is a league of Test cricket. Now, whether we do divisions or a World Test Championship or even do neither of those things, we're creating a league that we can sell, and that's where the money comes in, and that's where the rights are. Now, on top of all that, you will have a situation where it wasn't, I don't know if you remember, but when Bracewell was coach of New Zealand basically went, there's no reason, we don't have a good Test team at the moment. We're not going to have a good Test team for a while. Let's focus on one-day cricket. We should never be in a position in sport where that's allowed to happen, where a team basically goes, we're not going to do very good at this, so we'll go over here and we'll do something else. That makes no sense for cricket to allow that to happen. If we're in a situation, if Bracewell was the coach and he said something like that, and that meant that New Zealand was going to get relegated to Division 2, other than the fact he'd probably get fired for even saying it, something would happen. He probably wouldn't say it in the first place because he'd be like, no, we have to make sure we stay in Division 1. We have to make sure we stay relevant. Now, there are problems with the two divisions. For instance, it looks like Ireland and Afghanistan are automatically going to be the other teams, which I'm not sure is 100% fair. Also, that second division is a bit shallow at the moment. And I think until we have probably 16 teams in two really strong divisions, well, not two strong divisions, but, eight teams at the top who are really good, 8 teams in second division who are, rightfully in Division 2. I think the teams from Division 1 are going to have to play the top teams in Division 2. Otherwise, let's say West Indies or Sri Lanka are the first team there, and Bangladesh as well. We don't want them to actually drop out because they're bossing Afghanistan and Ireland and Zimbabwe around. We actually need to be a little bit more sensible, if you know what I mean. We need to make sure that, Sri Lanka or West Indies are still playing whoever it is, whether it's India, England, Australia, Pakistan, whatever, just to make sure that their players are being pushed at test level.
Yeah.
But eventually, that won't be as big a problem. And also, the other problem is one team being pushed up and one team being relegated is a bit silly. Eventually, you want 2 teams going up and 2 teams going down. But, it's not a perfect situation. But let me tell you, the way the cricket is run now, Test cricket is run now, is so worse than this. And I know there are a few Sri Lankan fans and Bangladesh fans, and there will be West Indies fans, I'm sure, as well, who probably are not overly keen on their team going to Division 2, and they see it as a bit of an insult. But realistically, I can only see them spending more money. I mean, you're in a situation now where Sri Lanka cricket is not spending the money it should be on making their team as good as it should be. You've got a situation where West Indies is in an open revolt with their players half the time. Those are things that if your team goes to Division 2, there's going to be so much pressure on the administration to get things right for the first time ever that hopefully some of those other problems will be fixed. Yeah. So I can only see it as a good thing, realistically, and that should bring more money in. It should make the games more important. And, I hope it helps world cricket. And it surely cannot be worse than what we have now, which is shit and stupid.
Quite, yeah. As I said, my initial hot take was like, this is weird. But after a short time of being an idiot and doing the whole I don't like change thing, I kind of my brain kicked in. It's like, actually, this is a really good idea.
Well, as I said, the important thing is it's not change. We have 2 division Test cricket. We're just not being honest.
Just don't call it that.
So what we have to do is come up with a stronger. And realistically, if Ireland, Afghanistan, Bangladesh, Zimbabwe, West Indies, Sri Lanka, whoever the 8th team ends up being, are all playing each other regularly, it should improve Ireland and Afghanistan. Zimbabwe will have to get something right, otherwise they'll fall apart and disappear altogether. And right at the moment, you would have to say, if we're being honest, West Indies don't deserve to be in Division 1 Test cricket. If that's the case, then they can earn it again. No one has the right to be playing at the top level of cricket. You have to earn it. No one should get automatically into a World Cup. No one should get automatically into a Champions Trophy, a World T20, or the top level of Test cricket. And that is, it is a ridiculous situation where you've got the teams, Zimbabwe, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka basically go, no, we don't want this. Realistically, Test cricket didn't want you, but we let you in, and you've done, really important things for the game. Bangladesh have the possibility of becoming a really important team over the next 10 years. We know how important Sri Lanka has been to cricket, and even Zimbabwe. They've had ups and downs, but they were a really quality team at times during the 90s. They made Test cricket stronger because they were there. Realistically, we want other teams to do that. And if Division 2 is a good way of bringing that in, because let's be honest, no one's going to play Ireland in more than 1 test at a time in the big teams. Afghanistan probably get 1 test as well. The best way for them to get a lot of cricket is going to be in a second division. So, I don't know, it just seems like it has hundreds more positives than it does negatives.
Yeah. Unfortunately, Jarrod, we've run out of time for this episode. It's been fantastic to have you on. Really appreciate you taking the time out to join me today.
Not a problem. Thanks for having me on.